So this episode of the videos is all about lists in HTML. And there are three kinds of lists, but first we're going to learn how to not make a list. How people think that this is an easy way to make a list, but it's wrong. So you've got something like this in an HTML document, and you load it in your browser and it looks like this, and you say, well, I don't want it to look like that. I've learned about the BR tag, which makes a line break. So maybe I should put that in. Again, this is wrong. I'm going to copy that and paste, 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 save. Okay, reload. And it looks like a list. And you think, yeah, that's what I want it to look like. But the problem is that your browser does not recognize this as a list. And when you're using CSS in the very near future, you can't style it as a list. And most important, in the hierarchy of the document, it's not seen as a list. So we don't want to make lists in this way. What we do want to do is we want to make our lists like this. So the same list with flavors of ice cream would, when it's styled as a list, it would instead look like this. And you might say, well, I don't want those bullets on the list. You don't have to have the bullets. The most important thing is that you use the HTML elements that are for a list in the proper way to create a list. And later, using CSS, you can make it look any way you want to. So I've got some text here to throw this in really fast. All right, so if I wanted to add some styles up in the head, I would use list style type none to get rid of the bullets, and I'm only getting rid of them on the UL, which is this entire list. So all these bullets will be gone as soon as I save this and reload. And you might also say, well, in my bad list that you told me not to do, I wanted everything over to the left side. I didn't want it indented. If you didn't want it indented, there is a way to handle that very quickly as well. And again, up in the styles, we can just add another style. We can take away the padding by making it 0, save, reload, and then it looks exactly like the bad list. So don't worry about what it looks like. What you want it to do is be styled correctly as a list. And that is this style you're looking at here. Now, this is the unordered list. An unordered list, by default, it comes up with bullets. The logic of an unordered list is that the items don't have to be in any particular order. They wouldn't mean anything different if you mix them all around. So that's what an unordered list is. An ordered list, for the example, I picked the order of colors in a rainbow because they are in a particular order. They don't mix and match. The green never comes before the red. The violet never comes in the middle. So this is the actual order of colors in a rainbow, right? What we see here is an order, and to get an ordered list, you're going to use OL instead of UL. So the difference between the two lists that you've learned so far, UL, unordered, and OL, ordered, is that ordered, of course, by default, it shows numbers, but more important, the items in the list are supposed to be in that order from 1 to whatever, and that's why you choose ordered instead of unordered. Now, another common use for an unordered list is actually to use it for horizontal navigation buttons. And you might say, well, these lists are not horizontal, they are vertical. And how can I get them to be horizontal instead of vertical? You will do that in the future with CSS, and I have an example here where you can see navigation buttons that are in a horizontal row, and they're actually all pressed over to the right side of the page. and they work like you would expect buttons work. We're on the About page, so that one's a different color. And when you roll over a button, it lights up or it becomes another color, and when you'll click it, you'll go to another page. So if you look at the HTML panel, you will see that this is an unordered list. You can see the UL, you can see /UL at the end, you can see the LIs at the beginning. Each item is a link, each word is a link, and at the end the /li to close the list item. You can also see in the CSS, the elements are enclosed by a div with the ID of nav. We'll be talking about those later in this series. And there is a UL that has an ID. It's within the there's a UL that's within the nav div, right? So here's the UL containing our 5 buttons, right? Home, About, Portfolio, Websites, and Contact. And so we simply have put styles on the UL, on the LI, and on the A tag that makes it a link. And these styles have caused this list, this UL, this unordered list, the styles in CSS have caused it to look like a nice row of buttons that you expect to see on a lot of different websites. So lists are commonly used for navigation, and commonly we use the UL list to enclose navigation links. The third type of list in the 3 types of HTML lists is called a description list. And it looks like this. So it starts with DL, and at the end of the list, you're going to have /DL. So that's the end of a description list. And within this kind of list, you do not use LI tags. Instead, you use DT for a term and DD for the description or possibly a definition, right? So the short item that is going to be expanded on is a DT term, and the longer explanation of that term is a DD description. So how does that look on a page? On our page of lists, it looks like this. And maybe if I narrow that up, it'll be a little easier for you to look at. So it doesn't have any style on it, but by default, most browsers will render it this way, where they put the term flush left, and then they indent the description. So there's no LIs, you have the term and the description, and you might say, well, it doesn't look that great, why would I use this? Again, it's a particular kind of format, it's a particular kind of structure in a document, and it's very commonly used when you have an FAQ, which you might think of this as being an FAQ. And you say, well, I don't like the way it looks. More normally, it would look like this. So after you learn to use CSS and then a little jQuery, you'll be able to make FAQs that look like this and that operate like this using, and yes, it's a definition list. Right there, you can see it, right? And the question is a DT, and the definition is a DD. The definition in each case is enclosed in the DD tags. So this is an example of how we use a definition list. And like I said, this is very common use, and you'll be learning this a little bit later, but this is why you want to know the 3 types of lists, because they're useful for different things. Last but not least, how to nest lists. That is, how to put one list inside another list so that you can have different levels of list, right? So what I've got here is 2 lists about Harry Potter. One is a list of the Harry Potter books, and another is a list of major characters who appear in all the books pretty much, but they first appear in the first book. So right now the 2 lists look like this. They are 2 completely separate unordered lists. What if I want to take the second list and place it right after this item, but indented so that the bullets are inside and underneath just this first item. Okay, you might think you could just grab the second list and paste it into the top list, but no, you first have to make a new LI element. And this is part of the HTML5 specification. If you don't do this, your page won't validate. Validation is done in a validator. We'll talk about this a little later, but if the page was online, you'd put the URL in here and you would check it. And if you were not doing what I'm doing right now, that page would not validate, meaning it is not valid markup. So what I'm doing here is to ensure that we have valid markup. So let me take my second list, including the UL tags, and I will cut it and I will paste it right in there. And I will show you a really cool thing that text editors do, most text editors. If you want this to be indented farther toward the right, usually there is something that will do that in your text editor. And you can do it multiple times. You can just indent a whole block, shift it toward the right. And so this gives you an idea of how we really want this to look. And save, and go back in here and reload. Voila. Now, one little unfortunate thing is there is this additional bullet that we don't really want, but we need to have the LI, so they make the bullet. We could take that off with CSS. The very last thing is, this is working with unordered lists. What if I make this an ordered list? So at the top, I changed the U to an O, and at the bottom, I changed the U to an O. This means the parent list, the outer list, is now an ordered list. Save, reload. That works just fine. But what if I wanted the list of characters on the inside to have to follow an outline format, not to have bullets, but to have letters or numbers instead? How would I do that? First, I need to change my inner list to an OL, so the first UL becomes O, and the slash UL becomes O, and save and reload. But that's not what we wanted, right? You would never want the inner list to have the exact same numbering system as the outer list. So what can we do to change that? There's a neat little thing that we stick right inside the list. Type, it's an attribute, type equals, quote, quote, and you just tell it the type you want it to have. So if you want it to be ABCD, you put type equals A. Save, whoops, sorry. Reload. Type equals A. What if you wanted it to be Roman numerals? You could say type equals I. Save. Reload. So you've got a lot of options for nesting lists, but this is, for some reason, people find this tricky. They don't do it correctly, and partly because they make it invalid. They forget to nest it inside an LI, but it's pretty easy to do, and it's a useful thing to have in your toolkit because document structure is so important. So sometimes you want to have a nested list. That's everything you need to know about lists. And this is the end of the video.